To all of you and welcome to Joy Business Economic Dialogue. Ghana's economy is at a critical stage. For some, it's an economy in crisis undergoing a reset. But for others, this is an economy that has turned the corner and showing great signs of a better future. One thing that cannot be disputed is that this is an economy with an inflation rate of 23.1% and a policy rate at 27%. Now, the Ghanaian economy is one saddled with debt and to some uncertainty. However, the finance minister, in his presentation of the 2025 budget, themed resetting the economy for the Ghana we want, believes his policies and programs are what Ghana needs for a better economy and economic transformation. So tonight we ask a very simple question. In the fixing of the fundamentals, is the 2025 budget Ghana's last shot at fiscal redemption? Is this the budget with the right policies and programs to deliver the Ghana we all want? Is this the budget that increases our revenue generation so we become self-sufficient? And I'm sure, as we talk about increasing revenue generation, it means we have to ensure compliance, something we've talked about all over the years. But how do we also deal with the smuggling of our minerals? Just recently, you've heard from the finance minister make the point that some 1.2 billion of gold smuggled in 2022 out of the country, as well as other products into the country without the payment of the much needed taxes. And as I've always referenced, a letter written by a Deputy Commissioner of Customs in 2015 to the then Deputy Chief of Staff indicating how we lost 36 billion Ghana cedis at the port. That's in 2015. Well, this letter, as I've indicated, was written in 2015, but the question is, how do we reverse this trend? My name is Winston Amwa. I'm the host of the Super Morning Show and also head of Joy Business, and I'll be moderating this all-important dialogue. My guest today, first, the Director of the Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research, Professor Peter Korte. He joins us via Zoom. Professor Isaac Boede is Dean of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance at the University of Professional Studies, Accra. He's in studio with us, and tax partner at PwC, Abeku Jankwansa, is also here. We'll be joined by the CEO of the Association of Ghana Industries via Zoom. John Ewa is the president of the Association of Ghana Banks, also joining us via Zoom. And we'll be joined by the economic advisor at the Ministry of Finance, Dr. Wisdom Dogbe, also via Zoom. But of course, Eric Defo is in the studio. He is the head of economic affairs of the Association of Ghana Industries. Stay with us when we return after this break. Abeku Jankwansa sets the tone for this conversation. We'll be right back. Right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. This is the Joy Business Economic Dialogue, and tonight our focus is on the 2025 budget. We've asked a simple question: fixing the fundamentals. Is the 2025 budget Ghana's last shot at fiscal redemption? And before the break, I told you that Abeku Jankwansa, who is tax partner PwC, will be setting the tone. He's with me on the screen. Abeku, so let's get into it. Let's look at the tax updates. Let's look at how we intend to increase revenue generation and what your thoughts are on these policies and programs.
All right. So good evening, Winston. Good evening to our valued audience. You've put it very right. I will be focusing on the tax updates in the 2025 national budget. So to guide the conversation, I will set the agenda. I'll move on from there to talk about the tax measures, because my panel here, or your panel, would address other aspects.
Yeah, your panel too.
Yeah, my panel too, that's right, Winston. And then open up for us to have a lot more conversation, and then that will end it as far as I am concerned. Winston, what was done on the 11th of March 2025 was Mr. President instructing his finance minister that the people you and I voted for, Winston, on the 7th of December, 2025, he should present to them his budget.
Yeah.
His people would review it, give their verdict on whether they approve or disapprove. And in this country, we've had an instance where a budget was disapproved in the last parliament.
Yeah.
All right, so it's not automatic that it would just be accepted. And then from there, other things would follow. What I want to do is for us to set the agenda in relation to that particular document. That document is titled the Budget Statement and economic policy. So the natural question that should follow up is that, what is a budget statement? What is an economic policy? And I hope that that sets up the conversation for the layman to be able to follow us over the period that we're going to be here in your studio.
Sure.
So to start, the budget is simply something outlining the revenues of government and how government intends to spend that. So in 2025, government says that I'm going to spend about 225 billion. All right?
As in raise
225 billion and spend about 280 billion. As to whether, Winston, this is too much or this is too little, I would set some context, and of course, the panel here would also help.
Great.
Where did we come from, Winston? That's the natural question that should follow. So in 2024, we are planning that by the time all the numbers are put together, we would have raised about 187 billion, spent about 248 billion, and then we had a deficit of about 61 billion. In one of the paragraphs, when the finance minister was in parliament, he said that they've listened to the cry of Ghanaians that you cannot keep on managing this deficit thing by continuing to raise taxes. So we would cut expenditure. Okay. So how was that done? Let's go back to what we see. We can see that revenues is expected to increase by about 21%.
Sure.
From about 187 billion to 225 billion. Expenses is expected to go up from about 248 billion to 281. In both instances, you can obviously see an increase.
Yeah.
But government is saying that I expect my increase from revenue to exceed my increase in expenditure. And you can see that that has translated into deficits obviously expected to go down. Now, Winston, I mentioned that, is this 225 too much? Is this 282 too much?
You want to answer that?
Those are the things I want to answer right away.
Please go ahead.
So let's go on. Winston, the economy of Ghana is expected to generate income to the tune of 1.4 trillion for 2025. Out of that, government says they want to collect from us collectively about 225 billion and spend collectively about 282 billion. This 282 translates roughly into about 20% of what we expect to collectively generate as a country.
Yeah.
Is that too much, spending about 20% of what we collectively generate? Is it too small? I believe that we'll discuss that a lot more. When you look at the revenue line, you can also play the numbers, and you can see that obviously it's far below 20%. Yeah. So all the income that we collectively generate, government is saying that I'm going to take so much, raise that, and then go in for loans of about 56 billion. So when government says, I need more TBs, I need more bonds, it is going to come up from the 57 billion.
Yeah.
So the average person that is following this conversation should ask, yes, the foreign bonds are a bit close to us. How am I going to contribute to this 67 billion? And this is not free money, by the way.
Exactly.
If you contribute part of the 57 billion, government will be paying you interest. So the average man that is following this conversation should see that government says, give me 255 or 225. I will spend on our doctors, our nurses, our policemen, the EC and all those guys, 282, and then we'll have a deficit of that. So maybe I will pause here. If there are any questions that you have to ask, Winston, then we can continue.
You go ahead. I mean, the questions will come.
Winston, now from this point, one would ask, what does it mean to the average man on the street? So I want to break it down further to the average man.
Okay, go ahead.
To the average man on the street, government is essentially saying that for the whole year, Winston, I will spend on average on each Ghanaian, assuming we are 34.5 million people, I will spend about 8,170 on each Ghanaian.
Okay.
Translated into months, government of Ghana says I will be spending on average about 680. And this on average means public sector wages, goods and services, capital expenditure, etc., etc.
Okay.
So per month, what I'm spending on the average Ghanaian, assuming that we are all going to enjoy it in equal proportions, is about 680, and that translates into 8,070. But the natural question that would follow is that how is government going to raise this amount? Two things.
Exactly.
From here and from there.
Okay.
So from here, government says that the average Ghanaian should be contributing about 6,520.
Okay.
But you and I know that our tax system, and I'll be dwelling on the tax now,
Exactly.
our tax system is structured such that we all wouldn't pay 6,520. Some would pay more if, for instance, you earn a lot more than others. Some would obviously pay less. Some that likes to spend in certain places would pay more.
And some may not pay at all.
And some may not pay, but you would hardly dodge from that. The reason why you will struggle to dodge is that, Winston, in our country, we raise taxes from three main buckets. And because we are a country of religious persons, let me use the church as an illustration. So when you go to church, Winston, you would be told it's offering time. So time to give your offering, come forward and come and put it in the bowl. Others would bring some sachet and pass it around, and you put in your money, and then we collect. So come forward and do all those sort of things. We can equate that to a kind of custom-related taxes. In other words, if you don't cross the border by getting up to go and put your offering in there, or when the thing comes to you, you just close your eyes and pass it, then that can be close to what we call the customs bucket that we have in Ghana. The second bucket that we have, Winston, in Ghana is what we call tithes in our churches.
Yeah.
All right? So the belief is that the more you earn, the more you give your 10% to God. So that equates to what we call income and property taxes also in Ghana. So it's a function of what you earn. And the last bucket is, you remember those days, Winston, we used to have harvests in our churches.
Yes.
And the way we do harvest in our churches those days is quite different from what we do these days. So the people will bring their plantain, their yams, and all those things. And then we have a bell. So we say, cowboy, give us your price.
Exactly.
Somebody says 20, then somebody says 30. Then we keep ringing the bell. And you who would have the last bell rang on you are the one who pays. We can see that as some taxes on goods and services. Because they show you something, you look at those things, and then you give your price. That's what happens.
Sure.
So to summarize once again, in Ghana, our tax collection is placed in three broad buckets. We have taxes from income and property, which is the same or can be likened to our tithes. Taxes from goods and services, which can be likened to the way we used to do our harvests. And then the last one, taxes on international trade. In other words, if those things don't cross the border, you don't have a problem with duties. So if you recall, during the election time, our current president said they've looked at an import declaration form and there were so many taxes he was reading out.
Sure.
Those were concerns to those.
But what if the taxes on goods and services are such that within my location, within my geographical area, within the people I buy, they do not charge these taxes?
Right.
They don't reach the threshold where they have to charge.
Brilliant. So we're going to deal with it. So let me come back. So remember three buckets. Income and property, tithe,
Yes.
goods and services, harvest, customs or international trade, your offering. All right. Now, you've raised the question around people, whether they reach the threshold or not. And we're going to have a VAT conversation as we continue. So our VAT system, Winston, is designed such that because there is a cost to tax collection, the GRA cannot ask everyone to be registered for VAT. So your corner shop in your area probably is not registered for VAT because we believe that the costs of getting that person to comply for VAT would be higher than getting a GRA person to chase the person to collect the money. So that is why in your area, certain places you go to, they don't pay VAT because we've evaluated and said that no, it's not worth it actually chasing these particular persons to collect that. So if you decide to shop in your area alone, you may not directly be impacted by VAT if you buy from people that are small. But don't forget, VAT is designed as a tax on value addition, meaning that when you are buying certain things, you pay VAT. When you are selling those things, whether you charge VAT or not, would largely depend on whether you are registered.
Exactly.
So if the people in your neighborhood are not VAT registered, then what it means is that when they buy those things, they would have bought it with VAT, but they cannot recharge the tax and so cannot set off. Because what you remit to the Ghana Revenue Authority is the tax on the difference, not what you collect. So let me break it down. You go to a typical shop in Ghana, you are charged VAT. Typically, there are exceptions. Typically, it is not what you collect that you remit to the Ghana Revenue Authority, because the tax says deduct what you incurred and remit the balance. So let's come back to the slide.
Let's go ahead.
So on average, government says, I need people to contribute revenues. And so far here, I'm not just talking about tax, even though I illustrate with tax.
Yeah.
The revenues are going to be made up of tax and non-tax revenues. But tax revenues constitute about 80% of this. And that's why we put a lot of focus on tax. If we get that right, then we are good over 80%. All right. So government says, per individual, Winston, give us 6,005. If you have a child who is not working and you have to foot all the bills, or Winston, you are not working and your wife takes care of you, your wife can multiply that by 3 and then see how much the household amount would be. So going down, the average Ghanaian, if you want to invest in treasury bills, etc., and you contribute at least 140 into the kitty, you are helping government address this.
Okay.
So I hope that this breaks down this whole conversation on what at all is this budget that government presented on the 11th of March to our parliament. It's simply, how much do I expect to raise? How much do I expect to spend? And what will be my deficit? And how do I intend to raise that?
Great.
Having established this, remember that the name of the document is the Budget Statement and Economic Policy. So let me now move to the economic policy aspect of it.
Go ahead.
And with the economic policy aspect of it, I would focus just on the tax aspect.
Okay.
And leave the non-tax and all that things to the other panel members to discuss. So what are the tax measures? Well, there have been a lot of conversations around, should we scrap betting tax? Should we scrap e-levy? Should we not scrap e-levy?
We've scrapped it now, haven't we?
We have, but you know what, Winston? It is not law yet.
Yes.
So Parliament, based on what I understand, up to midnight, went through to get these things approved from their end.
Yeah.
The president may decide to say, I'm not going to sign. Of course, that doesn't end it. There are certain procedures that would go through to get
Except
the
that he has
president
told us
compelled.
he's going to sign, and as part of his 120-day social
Promise.
contract.
Yes.
So we're
for
certain
now,
he's going to sign.
Yes, but it's important we say this because, Winston, if somebody transacts right now and is charged e-levy, the person may call his service provider and say, what is going on here?
Oh, no, the president hasn't assented yet.
Brilliant.
So now you'll be paying.
Brilliant. So you will pay until when the president assents.
And then after the assent, you hear the announcement from the GRA.
All right. That is correct to a very large extent. But unless Parliament decided to put in a date in what they approved, typically, GRA shouldn't even be interfering. Because the laws of Ghana doesn't say that we should wait for the GRA to give us a public notice before it becomes effective. It is the purview of Parliament to actually do that. But of course, in practice, sometimes you wait for them. So going into the economic policy aspect, the natural question that Winston I expect to be raised in the mind of a number of Ghanaians is, with all this scrapping, where is government going to get the revenues from to block the path? Winston, if you pick an economy like Ghana, people say we are highly informal. I say, no. I say that is the Ghanaian economy. That's what we grew in.
Okay.
In our area, we bought things from the corner shop. That is the Ghanaian economy, and we need to appreciate that the books that we read, informal economy, were coming from the West. Let us begin understanding that this is the Ghanaian economy, and let us tackle it as such.
Okay.
So going back, government says, I will scrap all these things. But because we are a small economy relative to the world, having tax policy is not sufficient. You need tax administration. And actually, I am of the school of thought that the effectiveness of your tax policy is actually tax administration.
Okay.
If government passes those laws and the GRA doesn't act well enough, and we're going to have certain conversations on that, it will just remain on our statute books and nobody would really mind. So government is saying that I am scrapping these things, but those who are not compliant, I will get them to be compliant. So if you look at certain portions of the budget, particularly paragraph 244, it says we'll broaden the base. And it's, yes, do you want to come in?
I want to come in at this point because we've been talking about broadening the base.
Yeah.
This is not the first time. It's like, the conversation we've had about modernization of agriculture.
Yeah.
We've talked about broadening the base. We've talked about adopting tax compliance measures. Even before you get into it, I just would want your thought on something because we've talked about this in the past. We've talked about tax administration. What's been our problem in achieving these objectives ever since we started talking about them?
Winston, we are having an economic conversation.
Sure.
And you cannot leave tax out of an economic conversation.
Exactly.
But we shouldn't also forget that tax is also underpinned by politics. If you decide to become an active politician tomorrow, your mindset first will be, how do I get the votes? Don't forget about that. If you are going to be touching certain areas and the people would complain and shout and threaten to vote you out, you'll be minded accordingly.
Okay.
The sector we have traditionally struggled to tax are the masses. So if I go to Mokola or I go anywhere, the guy sitting by the items to sell is one man, one vote. Take the big companies in this country, the mining companies, the upstream oil and gas company, where the CEO may not even have a vote, where there are a number of expatriates working. It's not one man, one vote. So the politician recognizing this would have to pay attention to the calls and shout of those people. How many people know that from 2016, even if you are an employee, the default stance is that when you work, you file your returns?
Sure.
How many people are complying 10 years down the line? Why is government not enforcing it? Can government enforce it on people in the market or even the public sector workers? Can government really enforce it? Those are the conversations that you're going to have. And sometimes I can really appreciate the struggle that a politician goes through.
But Abeku, 1 minute. And let me say we're also live on Joy 99.7 FM. So we're talking about enforcement. Is it the case that the politics makes it difficult to do that which we all agree should be done?
Agreed. Winston, agreed. And that is why right here I have set out what I call my criteria.
Okay, let's go through them.
To guide the conversation. And I would appeal to all of us as Ghanaians, not saying I don't recognize the emotional aspect of this conversation. There are emotional aspects. But let's elevate the conversation a little bit and be a little bit critical in the conversation that we're going to have. So to guide me in the economic policy aspect of what was presented on the 11th of March, with particular focus on the tax, I'm saying, Winston, let us evaluate each of the tax changes using these three broad criteria.
Okay.
What is or what was our objective? In line with the objective, how easy would it be to collect that tax? Because what is the point introducing a tax that you cannot collect? And then lastly, how can people easily swerve that tax?
Okay.
So starting with the objective, Winston, broadly, and I subscribe to that school of thought, whenever there is a tax measure, you may be looking at one of three things. And what are those three things? You may be looking at raising revenue. So I am bringing this, Winston, to raise revenue. I don't care about the equity of it. I don't care about whether people argue about whether it's fair, regressive, progressive. I don't care. I want to raise revenue.
Okay.
Another objective is, much as I need the money, Winston, let's be fair. If we are from the same household in the family and we need to go contribute towards something, the guy that brings the Land Cruiser should pay more than the guy that drives the Corolla ordinarily, because we don't just divide it equally that everybody should pay 10 cedis.
Sure.
So even with that design that we have in our traditional setting, tax also follows the same line. And that is why our PAYE table, for instance, is designed such that the more you earn, the more you incrementally pay.
Sure.
Not just the more you pay, the more you incrementally pay. So the second thing is the fairness. And then the last bit is what I call the encouragement or the discouragement, if there's any word like that, objective of tax. So let this guide the conversation, and my panel could introduce a bit more objectives as we go through this. So to repeat, is it raising the required revenue? The previous government said if we are putting in too much effort and the thing is raising in something, we call it a nuisance tax. So that could be a criteria for dropping something, not because it was given a zero tax, but because we're saying that the effort that we are committing is a lot more than we are generating. Okay,
so let me get you to answer the question about encouraging or discouraging, because we're having this conversation and it will be very important to find out, for instance, whether the system is fair, because we're looking at whether this budget helps us to fix the fundamentals and whether it's our last shot at, fiscal redemption. So let's start from the fairness bit. But most importantly, let's look at whether we encourage or discourage people from paying.
Winston, thank you so much for asking that question. I would drop that to the second one, the collection piece.
Go ahead.
Rather than the objective, okay, and keep my objective at that. Winston, my view has always been that the tax system in this country is avoidably complicated. Okay, to repeat, it's avoidably complicated. Why do you create a VAT system with 8 friends and family, whereby you can end up having about 10 taxes? I'm going to give you an excuse that I cannot comply. Okay. Why should I introduce emission tax and require the trotro driver who would ensure that people move from one place to the other to get onto a government portal to pay emissions levy? It's not going to work. What stopped you from getting that person, when renewing their roadworthy, for instance, to pay that in addition to that, than going to log onto a server to collect?
Okay.
So as far as we have a system in this country where it's so much difficult to identify people, the second criteria you've quickly mentioned, the ease of collection, makes it a lot difficult. And don't forget, we spoke about something before getting to this slide, and there was a reason I brought up, how does the budget look like? So if I go back to that slide, Winston, the person that is paying this 620 would be asking the question, how are they spending the 8,170? If the person believes that our leaders and our politicians are not spending the money enough, they will give you reason to say, make coin yeah. But Winston, you and I know that taxes are not paid for direct benefits. For direct benefit, you pay fees.
Yeah.
Taxes are paid for collective benefit.
Sure.
So you pay taxes. There may not be a hospital close by, but it may be put in some region or some places up north. As far as our monies are being used for that, you are happy because the tax that you are paying is for a collective benefit.
Except that you would agree that many people have complained that even the collective benefit, they don't seem to see it. Because, I mean, if we're talking about children studying in dilapidated structures, if we're talking about people not having access to
actually breaking on them,
then the question is, where is the collective good?
Brilliant. So people actually, in my view, are sort of revolting, contributing 6,520 per year on average, because we believe that the 8,170 is not put to the right use. But of course, when we go out there to exercise our franchise, the expectation is that the people you and I voted for to be in parliament would actually superintend and supervise what is being done. So at the end of the day, I would actually tell government, I think this 8,170 has been put to so much good use that this should have even been 10,000, so that we create a surplus and not a case where we have deficits.
Sure.
So I went here just to address your issue of collection ease. Remember, those people that will complain to you that it is difficult to pay, they are able to actually complete processes to be able to import things from China to sell. They are able to complete forms to go on holiday in the US. The reason is that they see a benefit.
Okay.
So we cannot lose touch and say, let's focus on a revenue conversation and leave the expenditure conversation. All right. So these 3 things Winston will guide the conversation on taxes.
Sure.
What is the objective? Is it the fact that the thing would raise more or it's not raising more? Is it really fair? And lastly, what are you encouraging or discouraging? So 1D1F, for example, had certain tax concessions because we wanted to encourage the setting up of of factories in each district.
Yeah.
So that's the conversation around what are you encouraging and what are you discouraging. Winston, if you have all these criteria and people can easily avoid your tax, sorry. Taxes influences behavior. If you tell me tomorrow that you're going to impose 100% tax on my income, I could just tell you I'd rather sleep at home. What is the need going to work? So taxes influence behavior. And because taxes influence behavior, people will be creative around it to try to avoid. So that is why it is one of my evaluation criteria here. So having established this, and for our listeners...
As in robustness to avoidance.
Robustness to avoidance. So the thing must be robust. If it's not robust, there's no need designing it because people will swerve their tax.
Is our system robust?
Well, in certain areas, yes. But I would say once again, the politics has made a lot of it not robust. So we're going to get into that as we go on.
Yes, let's get into it as we move on.
So, a couple of things. And let me just open up this so that those who are watching on screen can see. And I'm going to talk about a number of them. So the first one, Winston, there are three things going to happen in the withholding tax space. Three things. First, government says, you and I, employees, we have established a certain practice which we legislate, which is to say that anytime we increase our minimum wage, we should increase the band that is subject to a 0% tax. In other words, it is not every income that you earn that is straight away subjected to income tax.
Sure.
So government says the first thing I'm going to do is I would expand that band so that when I expand the band, you pay less tax, all else equal. The bills that went to Parliament, remember that what we're talking about is a budget statement. Yes, a budget statement and economic policy. And I said the budget statement is a statement of intent.
Sure.
Our parliamentarians would have to approve that statement of intent. If there are taxes that are in there which are going to be modified, our constitution requires that it is only Parliament that should be able to impose it. So Parliament could have said, I won't agree. The bill that went to Parliament, unless something happened last night, did not contain that particular provision. So you and I as employees, we need to wait a bit longer to see what will happen unless it's in there. The second thing relates to what sparked a number of controversies, and I've had the opportunity to clarify on certain places on the issue around betting tax, lottery, blah, 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 and all those stuff. For me, I'm saying that both sides are not necessarily wrong. It depends on your definition. In the tax law, when you talk about lottery, you're talking about lottery, as you know, and at least three other things.
Exactly.
You're talking about betting. You're talking about games of chance.
Of chances, yeah.
Amongst and gaming.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that what the minister said on behalf of the president, and he put certain things in inverted commas, he talked about lottery. If you don't look at the tax law, you will say, oh, he got it wrong, he's deceiving the people of Ghana. No. Look at the income tax law, and you'd appreciate why he used the word lottery.
Sure.
And those who said NLA never implemented, I understand. But they were coming from the usual meaning of what lottery is. Because the usual meaning of lottery does not include gaming, as you have the gaming commission usually would be in charge of. And then the last thing that is going to happen there is the bit on withholding tax on our galams, on small-scale miners. So three things. To the business community, Winston, anytime withholding obligations are taken off, the business community is generally happy, generally. And I'll explain why. Why? Because if the withholding obligation is there and I don't comply, GRA will come and impose on me sanctions for not complying.
Sure.
Even though I am an agent to help government generate the money that government needs. But GRA would impose on you sanctions in line with the law. So if you take away that obligation, then the good news is that I don't have those obligations to deal with. So for example, let me pick the issue around the gold, on unprocessed gold, and link it to a number of things that government wants to do. So under part of the gold, government says, I would take away the withholding tax. And it's important for us to think through carefully. Government has not said these people will no longer pay tax or income tax on the unprocessed gold. It says, I will take it away. What does that mean? Let me take you back into history.
Sure.
2016, we introduced the first express requirement to withhold on unprocessed minerals. And unprocessed minerals in our income tax law is defined to include gold and diamonds. All right? Unprocessed minerals is defined to include gold and diamonds. The people complained, and I understood the complaint. They are saying that, why do you impose a withholding tax of 10% on me when the general withholding tax was 3%, amongst other complaints? Government could have left it at 10 because government would say, look, I know the struggle I have with you people.
Okay.
When I do it 3, you people would not come back to discharge the rest of your liabilities. So that's why I'm taking 10. So if you don't come, it's okay.
It's okay, yeah.
So government responded, brought it down to 3. Then they shouted again. Then government dropped it to 1.5. And they shouted again, and now it is 0. Government making it 0, for me, I am not too bothered. Although Winston may raise fairness.
Why are you not too bothered?
Very
Yes,
good.
because of the question of fairness. Go ahead.
Brilliant. So Winston was saying, why should I work with a multimedia group break my back and be subjected to this tax. But those who are small-scale miners in respect of unprocessed gold would not pay tax. Why I would not be bothered is that if you connect that to what government is trying to do on the gold board, that should begin triggering some ideas from the cocoa board. Currently in our law, the income of the cocoa farmer from cocoa is not subject to income tax. And the reason is simple. We have a regime for cocoa buying and selling in this country. You cannot trade in it without a license, amongst others.
Yeah.
It is the government that must give you that license to trade in cocoa. And when they take the cocoa, government gets world market prices and pay you a certain amount. So sometimes you hear them complaining, this is the world market price, you are paying us so much. For me, I see the gap between what we make and what we buy from them as a sort of revenue to the state.
Okay.
I'm not really bothered whether the revenue is tax or non-tax. So I hope you understand what I'm saying.
But while I understand that,
Brilliant.
Also the encouraging and discouraging grounds is what we have seen with cocoa.
Brilliant.
Where the disparity in pricing has led to smuggling.
Agreed.
So?
Agreed. So if government can lock up those places, whilst one thing we say it is not fair that you are giving me so much in terms of tax burdens and not the small-scale miner, I'm saying, can we also look at the margin between what government gets and what government... And for me, because the people at 1.5 are unlikely to file a return, at 3, at 10, if you're going to make as a state a margin on that, block the holes, regulate the system, I think we should focus on the fact that we are making money from it and then we move on. So those are the 3 things for withholding tax. Then you've heard the issue around the growth and sustainability levy, which I would tie in quickly to the 2% special import levy. Growth and sustainability levy is just a new name. Winston, you can change your name tomorrow. For me, the principal thing and the character of the tax, although some will say, hold on, Abik, we've expanded it from profit to gross production amongst others. I'm saying, hold on. As far back as in the early 2000s, Winston, we had the National Reconstruction Levy. The National Reconstruction Levy, all right, that was introduced. We had certain entities that were subject to tax. We went on and we had the Professor Atta Mills-led government came in, changed the name, modified it a bit, and now called it National Fiscal Stabilization Levy. Largely modified along the same lines. In each case, we were told that it's going to be temporary. We went on. The banks maybe got themselves in trouble. They now had Financial Sector Recovery Levy, just applying to them in addition to the National Fiscal Stabilization Levy. Then we continued now, we renamed it, changed the name, probably got married or whatever, and now we call it Growth and Sustainability Levy. We expanded the reach to include so many entities that were not previously in there. So for me, what I'm saying is that, Winston, for the last 25 years, with just a few gaps, something that was meant to be temporary has almost become permanent. So this was supposed to expire this year. Government is now going to expand it to 2028. But in addition, and I don't know why people are not crying that much, in addition, for those in mining companies, government says, I would further increase it from 1 to 3%. Jensen, before we say 1 to 3% is not much, I'm saying, hold on. The guy was paying 1.
Exactly.
He's paying 3 now. That is 200% over what was being paid. That's the first one. Secondly, he's not paying it on profit. He's paying it on revenue, gross production. So we need to have conversations. And yesterday, there was something circulating on social media about the minerals guys issuing that. But then one thing of concern to me is that if you look at the appendix to the budget, we are expecting to raise about 5 times from the growth and stabilization levy. Maybe it's an indication that government says, I'm going to spread this economy to grow so much that whatever you collected for 2024, which was less than $1 billion, I'm going to raise about over $4 billion this time around. So let's wait and see.
Sure.
But I'll connect that quickly to the special import levy. Special import levy, same conversation. Came in somewhere around 2013 as 1 died with the MPP coming into power. 2 has stayed on up to now. Once again, the question is, we said it was temporary. Why do we still have it? What certainty does it create for the people? Is it because it's raising revenue? But are we really being fair in terms of our communication? I'm giving a very broad definition to fairness in here.
Sure.
Then I come to VAT, and I know this is going to be a bit of controversial point, but it's worth discussing. Yingson, VAT by design is designed to be a broad-based tax.
Sure.
So when we went through Kumi Preko somewhere in 1995 and all those stuff, we had a number of taxes that we consolidated to say now we'll call you VAT. Broad, it applies to everybody with a few exceptions. Anytime you decide to say you are giving an exemption, what you're actually doing is that you are narrowing the base. But VAT is expected usually to have a wide base.
Yeah.
So that you cover a lot of people. You broaden the base. It's actually a tax that is meant to broaden the base. But we want to narrow it. We want to narrow it in two main areas. The first area is that we're saying that imported raw materials for some pharmaceutical products.
Yeah.
And then secondly, some essential pharmaceutical product will be exempt. Okay, Winston, if you and I are not alive, we can't be here to lead this conversation. So I can understand why there may be some justifiable reason for narrowing the base. But the other question that comes up is, government says motor vehicle insurance, which was never really implemented, even though it was in our law. I'm going to take it out because I want to relieve households. Do I understand that? Yes, I understand that. But I'm also saying, hold on. Have we addressed the fairness aspect of this conversation? The average man that bought the trotro, is it the one we are looking at relieving so that it is not priced into the transportation fares? If it is, then should we be having a conversation around limiting the exemption just to commercial vehicles?
What do you prefer?
I would have preferred that if indeed that is the intention. Do I appreciate that it would make the system a lot more complicated? Yes, I know. But there's already complications in the law. And I don't think this would add so much complications, because with government saying that for non-life insurance, you would pay VAT.
Okay.
But for motor vehicle insurance, you would not pay VAT. That is already a complication that guys need to deal with in terms of their VAT allocation.
Let me ask you a quick one so that we get to the emissions and e-levy in particular. Then we wrap it all up because we need to get to the other panelists.
Yes.
Still, the Joy Business Economic Dialogue, we're asking a simple question, fixing the fundamentals. Is the 2025 budget Ghana's last shot at fiscal redemption? In here, we know that the finance minister or the government had promised that they were going to scrap the COVID-19 levy. They're going to rationalize VAT. Now, the minister tells us that the system is so complicated that he's seeking technical support in order to do that. Is that what you see? Or or like some would say, this is just a way of keeping one of the cash cows while government tries to address the challenges?
All right. Winston, my view, let me give a very short answer. Do I agree with the approach? Yes, I do agree with government's approach. So now let me give you a reason. If you've altered a certain system so much to deviate from the fundamentals, so we're having a conversation on the fundamentals.
Yes.
And you go and do ad hoc touches, you may end up spoiling the entire system. What I gather from what the finance minister said, and I don't have a reason to doubt, is give me time to have a comprehensive overview of this VAT. From next month, the IMF will come to town. I will tell them, I am your member. Give me technical assistance. I'm going to set up a committee to work with them and to resolve it. So I agree with the approach of not just removing one leg whilst the other legs are there. So I agree with government holding on to that and fixing the whole system. Because as we have now, Winston, would you believe that even in terms of positive VAT rates, we already have three? 15%, 3%, 5%. VAT is administered with three other levies. I choose to call them hair levies. And let me explain what I mean by hair levies. The hair levies, H means health levy, E means education levy, and R means recovery levy. So these three are administered with VAT, and each of them has a standard rate. So if I add the three to the other three, that gives me 6 rates already. Each of these have 0 rates. That gives me 10 rates already. And then when I import certain things into the country and I don't meet certain conditions, I pay the upfront VAT.
Okay.
That makes it 11. My view is, if you are doing a comprehensive review, please do that review, even including the base. And let me explain that, and that goes back to the shop in your area. We introduced VAT, failed initially in 1994, 1995, reintroduced it in 1998, had a new law in 2013, modified the base on who should register later along the line. For several years, we have kept that threshold at 200,000. 200,000. 200,000 in 2015. 2016 will probably be about $50,000.
Okay.
If I bring it into modern day, what is that amount? So you will get a situation whereby people who were not supposed to be in are in, and they will not comply.
So Abeku, let's do this. I mean, because I need to move to the other panelists. Let's do this. So you've talked about all these things. The question I ask is, from all the tax policies that you see in the 2025 budget, are these the sort of policies that would help fix the challenges with our revenue generation?
Provided government indeed enforces the laws.
You've talked about, the political angles.
Yes.
We've seen this happening over the period. So what is likely to change?
Okay. Hopefully, this is the first year. Government still has goodwill. In the budget, government has indicated that there's going to be a sustained tax education for the next 2 to 3 years so that people can actually understand why they contribute. If government keeps to that plan and government ensures that the revenues that we raise are actually going to be put to good use, I believe my people, the people of Ghana, would actually begin complying to fix the fundamentals that you and I want to fix. If government decided not to do anything in the budget, but even fix the VAT system, I think that was a good start.
But talking about people complying, we've had many of these. These are songs we've sung over the period. In the 2018 budget, we're talking. In the past, we had talked about how we didn't have a lot of people known to tax authorities, and so as part of our ways of getting people known to tax authorities, we said even mobile money should have tax identification number used in registration. Then we changed the tax identification number and said our Ghana card numbers should become our tax identification numbers as a way of making people known to tax authorities. Nothing much has changed. So what will change this time around, Abeku?
Winston, we are in the first year. The government is still in its first year. My recommendation is that whatever you want to do it now, because in election year, you cannot do it. In election year, you will be threatened with votes, and the right things that ought to be done would not be done. So I believe that if the sustained education, the utilization of our funds in value-adding things, and in what the minister said, that they would not only focus on tax generation, but on expenditure management, for the Ghanaian people to see that indeed this is going to improve, I expect things to change.
Okay.
But of course, it's an expectation. Maybe after the first year, I may sing a different story.
But as it stands, you say this is the right document.
I believe it is right. Once again, and I gave you reasons. For me, one of the main things is government saying that I would fix the VAT system. Okay. Because where we are, it is terrible. We shouldn't miss words. It is a system whereby, Winston, if you are not making profits of more than 6%, you'll be forced to become a tax criminal. Because government is saying that.
Tell me more about that.
For the levies, government says charge, but you don't get a refund. So let me give you an example. You go to your distributor or you go to your manufacturer to buy something at 100. Your profit margin, say, is 4%. That takes you to about 104, correct?
Sure.
Government says that when you sell that thing, give me 6%. How can you be paying 6% when your margin is, say, 4 or 5%? Okay. The only way you can keep your business will be probably not to comply. So if government is going to fix these things, make VAT work as indeed a tax on value addition. Inputs, take away from output, remit the balance. If it's not enough, then we deal with whatever happens. I believe that people would comply. Because people will not comply at the expense of killing their business. We need to note that.
Great. Abeku Jankwansa, thank you very, very much, for setting the tone for us. And that's Abeku setting the tone. He's a tax partner at PwC. This is still the Joy Business Economic Dialogue. Our focus is on the 2025 budget. We've asked the simple question, is the 2025 budget Ghana's best shot at fiscal redemption? When we return after this short break, we'll be hearing from the other panelists. I still have here Mr. Derek Defoe, who is the head of economic affairs at AGI. Professor Isaac Boedi is Dean, Faculty of Accounting and Finance at UPSA, and Professor Peter Korte is joined as via Zoom. I believe we have John Ewa, who is also the CEO of the Ghana Association of Banks, also joining us via Zoom, as well as Dr. Wisdom Dugbe, who is economic advisor at the Finance Ministry. Stay with us. Right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. This is the Joy News channel and is the Joy Business Economic Dialogue. Our focus is on fixing the fundamentals. It's the 2025 budget, Ghana's last shot at fiscal redemption. You've heard from Abeku Jankwansa, who is a tax partner at PwC, setting the tone. I told you earlier we had Professor Peter Korte joining us via Zoom. Let me just get his thoughts on what Abeku's talked about. We'll also get the thoughts of the other panelists in studio, Eric Defoe, who is head of economic affairs at AGI, and Professor Isaac Boedi, who is Dean, Faculty of Accounting and Finance at UPSA. So, Professor Peter Korte, if you can hear me, first of all, before you get to answer the question, take your thoughts on what Abeku Jankwansa, take the thoughts of those in studio before I come back to you for your main submission.
Thank you very much, and good evening to your discerning listeners and viewers. Good evening to the panel members, especially those on your studio and your good self. I think his submission was very clear, very simple, in simple terms, what the tax system looks like, the deficits, our perennial deficits, and how we borrow to finance the deficit. He's talked about the reforms. The reforms take some time, and you have to get it right. You don't have to rush into reforming the very complicated tax system. The VAT system is quite complicated. It's also very high. In fact, you could pay as high as 21, 22%, when on average, most African countries are paying 15 to 18% VAT. So that gives room for non-compliance. When your tax is so high, it pays to evade, or to evade tax is easy and pays off. So you ought to streamline the system and make it less complicated. But I think the main point I take from his conclusion is that these reforms are critical, but then the implementation is what is going to tell us whether we are really going to get out of this vicious cycle of budget deficits and borrowing to finance our deficit.
Now, Professor Korte, you are an economist, and many of you economists, like your mathematics. And in mathematics, there's something we talk about. If you know a man's past, you can predict his future. Based on how we've conducted ourselves over the period in this country, do you have the confidence that anything will change?
Wasted, to be honest with you, it's quite uncertain, and I'll be cautiously optimistic about this, about a change. Of course, the implementation will determine whether anything, or something significant will change. But why do I say? Let me give you a few points.
Please go ahead.
We provide a lot of tax reliefs. If you go set your minds by, you look at the 2027 budget, there were 16 tax reliefs. And we were very happy. We hailed the government. At the time, tax GDP ratio was 20% in 2016. Then we introduced all these 16 tax reliefs. They're quite enough. The last one really excited me. It says, implement tax credits and other incentives for businesses that hire young graduates. So to the extent that if you even employ young graduates, there's a tax relief for you. Did we implement this? That's the question. So we had 16. This time round is 5. But then the following year, or at the end of 2025, we will tell whether all these reliefs actually, we found a way of replacing them and also even increase tax revenue. That's number one. Our total revenue and grants increased mainly as a result of oil revenue. If you look at 2027, 2028, that was what happened. Now, in the current budget, there is the talk of increasing income from property, income tax, and also tax from property by 45.5%. I don't know by what magic we can increase property and income tax by this margin. So, we've seen a lot of figures churn out there. The reliefs are welcoming because we've made a lot of noise, but they are very uncomfortable. Yeah, some are nuisance taxes, and we want to see them removed as taxpayers. However, I am concerned about how we are going to plug that hole. The reforms takes time. So I think we are setting the tone.
Okay.
However, I don't think this year, 2025, we will see a major increase in revenue.
Okay. Great. I'll come back to you, Professor Korte, because you do your presentation also, like I indicated. I mean, all panelists were giving a chance to make a presentation. But let me get your thoughts, Professor Isaac Bidi. You've listened to, Abeku Jan Kwanzaa make the point. What are your thoughts on what he said? I mean, any points of agreement or disagreement?
Yeah, Winston, thank you very much for the opportunity, and good evening to your viewers. Good evening to my colleagues. It was a wonderful presentation from my good friend from PwC on the position of revenues. In fact, my concern always has been on the issue of tax education. And I'm happy he mentioned that, and I hope the budget also captured that. I have yet to find out in terms of the allocation towards that, how much to help. For all that we have said over the period, if those characteristics of tax are not met, conveniency, equity, and all those things, my brother will still come back to the same situation. So it's good mentioning all these figures. In fact, when he was projecting the values, I would have loved to have seen not a deficit. Now we are recording about 57. When can we have zero?
I'm sure maybe when Professor Korte tries to answer the question, he would address that. But let me bring you in, Eric, therefore.
Yeah, good evening to your viewers and listeners. I think Abeku did a good job on the tax issue. And if you don't have money, you can't spend. So we need to find a way of streamlining our tax issues. We shouldn't see tax from the business side as being punitive. Once you see tax as being punitive, then it demoralizes you from even taking action to generate economic activity and revenue.
Okay.
So if they streamline it and they make it more appealing to people to pay tax because they can see the benefits of paying tax, we may change the dynamics a bit.
I mean, Eric, before you continue, I mean, you've said something. We shouldn't make it look like punitive. I know you're a businessman too. You're a business owner. Do you see it as a punitive measure? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, taxation is one of the things that creates challenges for business. Because this is money we, normally would like to turn over, all right, to generate more.
You're paying a percentage, say a quarter of your profit.
Yes.
Why should that be a problem?
You see, in business, we have a number of things that militate against our progression. One is taxation, the other is cost of credit, and then we have exchange rate, then we have energy cost and its reliability. All these things affect business. Now, the standard practice is that if I generate more, government will earn more. So government must support businesses to generate first before it taxes.
And you think government is not doing that?
No, it's not.
Okay, I'll get back to you because you would have your time to also, ask all, address all these questions. But let me get back to you, Professor Peter Korte. And now it's time for you to tell us whether, the 2025 budget, when it comes to fixing the fundamentals, is our best shot at fiscal redemption. Over to you, Professor Korte.
Well, thank you very much. And I think I'll relate to my earlier point about the need the point that we are setting the tone. We are just setting the tone, and therefore, this budget might not solve all our problems. But if we do it right, if we implement, then we're likely to see more benefit. We're likely to see the fiscal redemption that we all ask for. But again, I think we are very ambitious in this budget. If you look at some of the budget lines, I've mentioned the income from income tax and then property tax, an increment of 45% in a year. It looks quite ambitious. Perhaps over time, if we kick in all the reforms, then we are likely to rake in this. Although our focus has been on our discussion so far has been on income, but we haven't spent much time on expenditure. And I think that's one area. You can raise all the revenue that you need, but if you are not prudent in your spending, then you are likely to continue to have this wide fiscal margin. There's one fiscal measure which I think if we are able to implement, that's going to be great. Setting up an independent value for money office to scrutinize public procurement above a threshold. And I think you'll find this in the budget statement. And I think that's one key area where if we're able to, again, enforce, that is going to save government a lot of money. But procurement of goods and services is a major part of, and even CAPEX, a major part of government expenditure. And I don't think we are getting value for money. We did an estimate and realized about 39% of our investment are inefficient. In other words, we lose 39% of monies we invest out of inefficiency. So that is a critical area. Then in every, you see in this budget, in the past 10 or so years, right from Honorable Setekpe's time up to date, you will see the gift-based system, because government is not able to have fiscal data in real time. There's always off-budget spending. There's always some of the sectorial or some of the sectors or ministries, department agencies spending outside the gift mix, and government is not able to control. That is why we have budgets on cash basis and on commitment basis. So on the commitment basis, when you finally get to know the figures, you realize our budget is thrown out of gear. So if we're able to also implement the gift mix system as is being recommended in this budget, I believe the tone is being set for us to realize what is being proposed. I would also want to make a point about growth.
Okay.
In as much as we are giving all these tax reliefs and all the measures and all the spending, I think our growth projection is much lower than in 2024. And I think the policies should match. And if we are giving reliefs, tax reliefs, you are stimulating the economy, you should expect to stimulate or generate growth. But a growth rate of 4%, when we are grown at 5.7%, I think is low, especially because it is below the Sub-Saharan African average of 4.2%. So again, the budget sets the tone, but I think there are a few areas that needs much of reform. We look at the budget deficit. We are told it's 7.9% for 2024, and we are targeting a budget deficit of 3.1%. Again, that is very, very ambitious. I wonder what we will do this year to have the budget deficit. That is a huge task to achieve. But in all, I think the idea of tax education is important. Not just educating people about their civic responsibilities, but you also have to see what the monies are being used for. Because if I'm not convinced that my money is used to benefit me, it will be difficult for me to pay taxes. No matter how low your tax rates are, no matter how easy it is to pay tax, no matter how convincing your tax education is, I think government on this part would also have to ensure that people who pay taxes see the benefit. Their street lights are working, their roads are being constructed. Government itself should show in its behavior, its spending, that it is not, it is prudent rather than being spendthrift and wasting money. Of course, the last thing about the issue about corruption is quite key. So that ought to be addressed head on. So I think I will stop here and allow others to also make their submission. But I will come in as and when the need arises. My point is that it's quite ambitious. The target that have been set are quite ambitious. Nevertheless, if we implement them very well, we are setting the tone for 2026, 2027 to record better figures.
Why, I mean, talking about being over-ambitious, Professor Korte, why do you say that? I mean, we need, I mean, you've criticized, for instance, our growth rate. You've said that it's not ambitious enough. So why do you think when it comes to the other areas, we're being over-ambitious?
Well, the numbers are there. The fiscal numbers are there. We've currently recorded a deficit of 7.9%. And if you look at the expenditure numbers, that's the figures that the PwC gentleman projected, you will see that, yes, although expenditure growth is lower than income growth, we are still increasing our expenditure. So how do you forecast that you're going to have your deficit? That is quite ambitious. Then, as I mentioned, I've looked at some of the budget lines, the income from property, tax on domestic goods and services, tax on income and property is projected to increase by 45.4% a year. That variance is quite significant. It's just too high. Then tax on international trade, we are projecting to increase it by 37.5%. That again is too high. So all of this tells you we are being ambitious with some of our numbers.
I mean, at least when it comes to growth, it says of at least. It says at least. That's what I want to do. I mean, I'm not going below that, but isn't that enough indication of willingness to achieve more?
Well, you set a target and then you work towards it. But if you set a low target and you get 4%, you say you have achieved. I think we should, especially look based on what we recorded in 2024. I think in setting our growth rate, we should be a bit more optimistic. I think that's the projection IMF made in 2024 for 2025, and we are keeping the same number. They did the same thing, IMF did the same thing with our growth numbers, and we exceeded. So I don't think we should stick to IMF estimates. We should do our own in-house estimates and be more aggressive, more purposeful in promoting growth. But that's the only way we can also increase the size of the cake and generate jobs. If we don't grow, you cannot provide the needed jobs. You cannot lift many people out of poverty. If you look at the northern part of the country, we have over 23% of these 23 districts whose multidimensional poverty rates are above 50%. So to lift such people out of poverty, it should be growing around 8%. 4% will not make much progress, in my view.
Let's look at inflation before I come in studio, because we're targeting an inflation, end-of-year inflation of 11.9%. You think that is also being overambitious, or for that you think we're being realistic?
I think we may miss that, but by a smaller margin. I don't think we would get to 11 points. Because the point again is, if you look at the sectorial projections, agriculture is not going to grow by any major margin. Our food production is not going to increase by any, and food inflation has been a major problem in this country. So within a year, I don't see us bringing food inflation down. Exchange rate depreciation, maybe we might minimize exchange rate depreciation, but bringing down inflation to this level, I think might take longer than just within a year.
Talking about exchange rate depreciation, you've talked about inflation, but I mean, government is, in its strategy, talks about effective debt management and interest rates, for instance. And we may have had this conversation before about how government has been trying as much as possible to reduce the interest rate on treasury bills. You think that's a good strategy, or you say that's counterproductive?
No, certainly. I mean, high interest rates doesn't augur well for businesses, doesn't promote business growth. It makes the cost of production or cost of doing business high. So if we're able to bring down interest rate using market forces, that is market demand and supply, or through policy, that is fine. But we shouldn't create an artificial reduction in the interest rate. That will not help. And when we are doing that, we should also be coordinating with the central bank. The downward spiral in the interest rate is hurting the central bank because the exchange rate has started depreciating, and Bank of Ghana had to step in to supply more dollars. So let's have policy coordination between central bank and the fiscal authorities. But I think it's a good idea to continue to do the needful to bring down interest rate. And government taste or quench for borrowing is what drives the money market rate. So if government itself is not borrowing as much from the money market, that is a good signal. That will gradually push down the interest rate, but not to artificially force down interest rate. That will generate problems for our exchange rates.
But Professor Quartey, I mean,
you also affect the real sector.
You say if government doesn't borrow much, it will drive down the rate. Government isn't borrowing much, so how does that amount to being artificial?
Well, it's been alleged that government is using MDAs, funds of MMDAs, instead of borrowing from the money market. It's falling on funds of MMDAs, which is also going to stifle their ability to provide goods and services. So if that is the case, then that is going to, affect government business. But if it is not borrowing much because it doesn't need to borrow much, then that is a good signal. We've heard recently government trying to reopen even the bond market. So we can see that the taste to borrow or the interest to borrow hasn't gone down. Government has a deficit to finance. So obviously there is going to be some borrowing.
But I mean, talking about the MMDAs, you've heard the president, I'm sure you may have heard the president say that they are prepared to release 80% of funds from the District Assembly's Common Fund to these MMDAs. Doesn't that, deal with the challenge you have?
Well, already, I mean, they complain about lack of funding. Most of I'm sure if you go to your municipal authority, they will tell you how they've been stifled. The allocations don't come. So if right from the word go, you're saying you're not going to give them 100%, but 80%, then I hope that doesn't translate into even much lower allocation or disbursement to the MMDAs. But if the 80% is going to go, and I trust the president is going to do that, then bingo, because that will be an improvement over the past. And that is going to help them fix the potholes, fix some of the waste disposal issues, and fix some of the other challenges that we find in our municipalities.
Okay. Let me get your, thought on something, because we're contemplating, we were actually thinking of going onto the domestic bond market in the second quarter of this year. We've seen the finance minister engaging, pension fund holders and all of that. You think it's a step in the right direction, or we're rushing to the markets?
Well, we by all means have to open that market, but we need to do that cautiously. One, the effect of the 37% haircut is very severe. It's still hurting people. It's still fresh on people's minds. So how you get people with surplus funds to buy into your bonds depends on how you position yourself, how you convince them that this next time round they are going to suffer, not going to suffer haircut. I see government has has been funding the sinking fund. That is a great step. If you continually fund the sinking fund, and when coupons become mature and government is able to pay without delay, that again sets the tone for the bond market. But I think it's my view that we shouldn't rush to the market. Let's do a few of these things, convince Ghanaians, let them see some results. So I will do that after perhaps a mid-year review of the budget to see that a lot of the things that have been said are actually yielding results. Then the confidence will be built, will be strengthened for fund holders to buy into government bonds as and when they are being offered.
So you would say we go during the third quarter and not the second quarter?
I would have, yes, that would have been a better. At least you have your mid-year budget review, you present the figures, people are very much convinced that, look, your revenue measures are working. You have a sinking fund, you have some reserves, inflation, exchange rate is relatively stable. Some confidence building is key before you go to the market. Because I can assure you, I can tell you, there are many who have not been happy with the haircuts, many who bought into these bonds so they could use the coupons to buy medication for their pensioners, etc. And they have lost so much. They've lost so much confidence in the system that to get them back might take some effort. So let's not rush to do this in the first second half of the year, second quarter of the year.
You, the economists, say when there is confidence, a lot of things would happen. The politicians would say after there's a change in government, and particularly with this kind of victory secured by the current government, and you're talking about the budget, you've indicated it has the right policies. Is that not enough confidence to try going in the second quarter?
The confidence, you build confidence. Yes, people voted, but they wanted a change from what was happening. They wanted a change, but that does not mean that because they vote for you, so they are not analyzing the market. No, you'll be surprised. Yes, they have confidence in you. They want to see some change. And I think we are seeing some of this in every election year. Post-election year, we see within the first 2 quarters, there's turbulence on the exchange rate market. You see inflation, galloping. You see a lot of problems. But this year, we've seen some relative stability. It tells you confidence is coming back. Of course, at the back of the IMF program, but confidence is coming back. But let's not take the confidence that for granted and start revisiting the past. We should take our time, show some numbers to assure Ghanaians that, yes, you have confidence in me. I am also delivering on my mandate. These are the results. These are the outcome in what I stated in the budget. These are the revenue measures. This is what I'm achieving. And that certainly will bring investors back. Money doesn't like noise. Investors do not like noise. The least mistake you make, they will run away. And it will take a lot of time, a lot of convincing to bring them back to the market.
So if I were to ask you simply, Professor Quartey, is this budget our best shot at fiscal redemption? What would you say?
There's room for improvement. I think it sets the tone, it gives some hope. There's room for improvement. I think some of the numbers, as I mentioned, could have been much better. Some are ambitious, but the revenue measures and the reforms, for me, sets the tone for us to really prepare for a better future. So if you ask me, I would say to some degree, it sets the tone for our fiscal to be improved.
Okay. Please hold on for me, Professor Quartey. Let me get in studio. Abeku, anything you want to say about what Professor Quartey has said?
No, nothing to add, Winston.
Okay, you agree with him?
Yes. How
about you, Professor Boedi?
Yeah, I think we tend to agree on some of the things that he raised. And I think majority of the issues have been covered already. And sometimes we feel that on several platforms we give a lot of ideas. And sometimes we feel that we are preaching to the choir because the same issue every time we come back, the same issue. But maybe one day. I'll
get back to you on, because you are a professor of finance, I'll get back to you on, going back to the domestic capital market. But let me hear from you, Eric Defo.
Well, I think that we can say that there's hope. I particularly was excited about the strategic innovations that the finance minister brought into realigning some of the expenditure items to create some fiscal space to do other things. But, our economy primarily is a consumption economy. And if we want to reset, then we should be focusing more on production. But if you look at the budget as it was structured, the 120-day promise or social contract didn't focus too much on production. It was trying to create some space for people to feel some benefits, like the removal of all these e-levy and some of the taxes. But coming from an industry perspective, I think that we need to be deliberate in our actions. I mean, there's this debate within the intellectual circles about whether stability should come first before growth or whether growth should come first before stability. I believe in the second option.
As in growth should come first before
growth
stability.
should come before stability. Growth can lead to sustainable stability. But if you take knee-jerk actions to bring about stability, you are likely to bring in money like debt to stabilize the system. And if your production doesn't take up, then you end up in this vicious cycle where you eventually end up as we've ended. So if we spend more money, running a deficit budget is good, but only on condition that the deficit goes into production. Then it generates money to pay back. But if you consume it in social programs, you definitely end up borrowing and borrowing and borrowing.
Let me get Professor Quartey's view on, growth before stability or stability before growth briefly before I get to Professor Bode. Professor Quartey, what do you say, growth before stability or stability before growth?
I would say you need both simultaneously. You need to grow, but as you're growing, you also have to do the things that will bring stability to your economy. Growth can also lead to some inflation, depending on where the growth is. If you are growing, you're not growing the productive sectors, but you're growing other sectors that do not enhance food production, do not enhance the agrarian sector, your food baskets, etc. It can lead to inflation. So you strike a delicate balance and ensure that as you're growing, you're also stabilizing certain areas that can create problems for your growth itself. So they work hand in hand. But I agree with him. We need growth. We need stability as well.
Okay, let me bring you in, Professor Isaac Bode, at this point, whether you think the 2025 budget is our best shot at fiscal redemption.
Yeah, Winston, I think if you look at the topic you gave us, very interesting topic. I don't know where you get inspiration from to get all these key words there. Fixing the fundamentals.
Yeah.
2025 budget, the best shot at fiscal redemption. And to help our listeners, sometimes we need to break some of these words down, what we're actually looking at,
Sure.
then how to achieve those things. Fixing the fundamentals. Do we have fundamentals? Have we achieved those fundamentals? Where are we now with the fundamentals? Then we can look at the fiscal redemption part of the story. Fundamentals. Over the years, Ghana, I think with the recent figures that we have in terms of the fundamentals, if you pick a typical case of inflation over the period, the previous administration up to today left the economy, I think, halved the inflation figure from 54 or so to 23%. It's not the best. We wish to have a single digit as usual. At least we've seen some signs. GDP left the economy, I think, 5.7.
Yeah.
Key thing. Then we are looking at foreign reserves, also improved. Then we have translated into import cover of almost 4 or so. We can go on and on and on, but at least we have seen some signs of some improvement over the period. Now we can look at for the fiscal redemption. You and I, we know that For fiscal consolidation, we are looking at deliberate policies that will increase revenue, control your expenditures, and manage how to manage your debt. About 3 issues will be featured in the fiscal consolidation. Now, in terms of redemption, if you're talking about redemption, probably I'm sure we are looking at a situation where the government or the state makes efforts to restore the country or the economy into some financial stability over a period or credibility. What about the case of Ghana? And we will agree that mainly we are looking at stabilizing our city, maintaining, managing our debt over a period of time. And that is where we have issue. My good brother was giving us a brief overview of the budget, and we can now come to the budget issue discussions. Revenue will often talk about where you get the money from, and the expenditure will look at where those funds are going. So in between, you take a decision what to do. Your revenue stream against your expenditure. And I'm happy the figure he gave us, 225 as against 281, leaving us a deficit of 57% or so. It's a worrying situation. I don't know when we can have a balanced budget, and I don't know when. Let's come back to the revenue part of the puzzle. For this year, we have been told we have about 7 streams of revenue that we are going to collect. And one has to do the tax on income and property. This time is going to go up by 24% against last year. In terms of tax on domestic goods and services, it's going to go up by 21.9%. If you look at the international trade, which he mentioned on taxes, import duties, it's going to go up by 30%. Then if you look out for the others, about 31%, and then grants is going to go up by 56%. The only thing that will not be touched or that will not go up is the non-tax revenue. We expect a reduction. The non-tax revenue, we are looking at those fees and those subsidies, the SOEs, those who are paying dividends to the government and fees. We'll come back to that area. I have perused the budget over the period since it was announced since last 2 weeks ago. And for us to achieve the fiscal redemption, I have noticed about 4 things. The key one is revenue mobilization.
Okay.
And I will develop that later.
Okay.
The other thing we are looking at is expenditure rationalization, debt management, and structural reforms. The corruption, procurement, the system must be overhauled. Now let's come back to the revenue mobilization portion. We know, and over the period, I have been someone who have been calling for a support for GRA in an attempt of getting revenue into the country, support our budget. I feel that GRA cannot do it alone.
Okay. They're the ones tasked to do it. What other supports do they need? I mean,
Well, they've tried over the period, several measures put in place. In fact, if you look at our ports, where we get huge sums of money coming in, you look at the mining sectors, you look at the petroleum sector, 3 areas, very key towards revenue generation. If we mix these 3 areas, we'll push the burden to all of us. And if you look at the performance of GRA over the period, in fact, it was the last year we're told they had increased their revenue, their target. I think about 2%, I've forgotten.
For the past 3-4 years, they've always exceeded their targets. I have always said that their targets are low. And my friends at GRA have had a cause to disagree with me, but They've been exceeding their target for some time now.
Well, they have. But then we can look at the target as well. But if we do more in that area, we'll get more revenue to support our budget. Let me give a typical example over the period, what I've noticed in the revenue drive to help the economy. And I've said the GRA cannot, at this point, do it alone. We've been calling for one initiative, the PP, the public-private partnership. One of the things that most other countries, they do. You know, Winston, if you happen to be a government, you have a budget to run, and you have, assuming 100 cities for a project, you can't get 100, even if you can get 100 cities, and you decide to join, become a partner to that project, I will not provide 100 cities again. I have to provide 50. Then you also provide 50. You free me, you give me a space to use that 50, which I will save, and push it to other projects. You save me. I've been able to use the fund to do other projects. We have seen, there was something that we put out in paper some time ago about some other organization like SML.
Okay, what about them?
Getting revenue for the government. Let's go back and look at the figures some time ago, somewhere before 2019, over the period. If you look at the revenue stream of the petroleum sector for some time now, we've had a lot of revenue leakages. We've had a lot of issues in terms of tax evasions and under reporting of some of these petroleum industries. When the agreement was signed by this particular entity, before the agreement, the NPA and GRA had discrepancies in terms of volumes. A typical case from January to December 2019, total volumes of 4.85 liters.
Billion liters?
Billion liters.
Okay.
Against the taxable liters, I mean, in terms of volumes, was about 2.3 or so. That gives you almost half. That liters were not accounted for. And we lost a total revenue of about 3.4. Look at this. If you have a situation like this, how do you generate revenue to help our economy? And that is why, at this stage, if you look at period in which this company, before they took over, how much as a country we've lost. And they are doing so well over the period in terms of mobilizing funds to help our economy. So I think if we have institutions of such sort coming in to help GRA, I think as a country we'll do well in meeting some of the targets that we are talking about here. So it's a good story to be told. The case of SML, what they have done over the period. This is an individual who invested so much money into this company on his own, trying to help block some of the leakages that we have in our system. So Winston, I think on the issue of what we can get out of the budgets, 4 areas I've itemized them: revenue mobilization, that drive, we should enhance that strategy. It will help. If we are not doing this right, we'll do everything. So what do we have? Expenditure. If I don't have revenue, how do I spend? Okay. There's no way I can spend.
How about plan to get to the domestic capital market in the second quarter?
Well, there's nothing wrong to borrow. For me, finance will tell you there's nothing wrong to borrow. It's about what you use the funds for. And the cost of borrowing be my issue. If you want to borrow and you're using the funds well, I have no problem. And you also know that if you can get cheaper source of funding, why do you go for a higher one? And we know that the government is not going to compete with others in the market in getting funds. If you want to go to capital market, of course, anytime you want to raise funds, you have other two options. You do internally or you do externally. And that's what we have been told, that very soon the government also get into the market also to borrow. So there's nothing wrong to borrow, but what are we going to use those funds for? And how are we in terms of cost of getting that funds?
But I mean, that raises the question, what Professor Peter Korte was talking about. Now, many people may not have a lot of confidence in you. And in fact, part of our problem, I mean, you know, part of our problem was when we attempted borrowing at the time when we were at high risk of default, we attempted borrowing, and when we were rejected, it triggered some of the problems we find ourselves in. Shouldn't we tread cautiously?
Well, I think as a country, we've tried on several times. Sometimes we go into different markets to go and borrow.
Now we can't get into the international market, at least not for now.
Well, for this year.
Yes.
I don't know what happened next year. That's why the minister also wants us to borrow money locally, trying to raise the T-bill, trying to, raise some money. But the issue is that if it's going to get into the market, the same market, we have other competitors as well, individual companies also going to the same market to go and borrow. You create competition. And sometimes people will be comfortable giving money to government than to give it to the private person. But we can tread cautiously. But the issue is that, do we need money? How do we raise the money? Can we get those funds internally? Can we also block the loopholes, the leakages I talked about? If we're able to do it. Because you can bring huge sums of money into the country, and so you are leaking the funds. What do we do? So we can tread cautiously, it's fine. But then the issue is that we should have a purpose of whatever we use the money for.
Okay. Let me get your thoughts, Abeku, on treading cautiously and how we can increase our revenue and all that. You spend a lot of time talking about revenue. What do you make of some of the things that Professor Isaac Bodi said?
Well, I do agree with what Professor just said about GRA needing help. Reason being that for a reason we run a collective society. There is always a conflict between what should be a public good and what should not be a public good. But we all understand that Wednesday we must all come together to build this Ghana agenda, and GRA can be assisted in various fronts. The first, in my view, is what, Winston, you're actually doing here with this dialogue. We are trying as much as possible to break down the message down, because if you want to get somebody to comply, the person must first understand. And that is something that we are doing for GRA. The GRA laws require them to also ensure that people understand the tax laws. And I'm not sure GRA has paid you, but here you are trying to do these things. So that is an assistance that GRA needs. The second thing which the minister, on behalf of the president, has promised in the budget is the issue around tax dialogue. My people will say that I drain in tobacco trim.
Sure.
Winston, right even on this table are different perspectives, even with what Professor is sharing. Our backgrounds are very different. The way we see things are very, very different. Another way the revenue obviously needs support will be to hear from people. You may not necessarily agree with them, but hear them out and then incorporate whatever they are saying to make recommendations to government. So hopefully the promise that the finance minister made that there will be quarterly dialogue to discuss, say, tax matters will really be held, and not only just to discuss. My hope is that whatever comes up of those conversations will be effectively implemented. Because what is the point in inviting people, listening to their inputs, and not making attempts to implement them? And then maybe the last thing I would like to say is the revenue itself should be seen as leading the pack in terms of implementation. So for instance, let's go all the way back to this motor vehicle conversation and premiums that we're talking about. The law was there as far back as in 2013. or even let me pick even the electricity conversation. Electricity has been subject to tax or VAT at a point whereby if you deal with those who are in the offices, etc., they see VAT on their electricity. For household bits, we've not really been able to implement it. Anytime government tries, there's a political outcry and government backs down. Is it about time that GRA actually have a wide conversation to say that having things on your statute books where you do not enforce can actually lead to a stage whereby we'll get to the point where people will begin to say, oh, GRA required the men for the serious. Because even the things on their statute books, they do not enforce. So just in line with what Prof has said, when it comes to support, I believe that the revenue also needs support. You and I can do that by the public education that we are doing here, because people would only comply when they really understand what you are trying to do. Two, whenever government begins to implement the quarterly tax dialogue, indeed, I hope that those dialogue will be efficient and effective, meaning that you don't invite people around the table, they come to sit, they speak, and then you do not actually hear them. And then the last thing is that GRA itself should ensure that things that are on our statute books that are not being implemented, we now go back to have a conversation with government to say, let's take these things off our books. Otherwise, we'll get to a point where people would say, we have these things in our books, but never would they be implemented. So those are a few addition I would add to what Prof just talked about.
Eric Defo, what would you say, your views on what Prof has talked about?
With relation to taxation?
Revenue, yes, and all
okay.
that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, Prof has nailed it in the fact that when you generate revenue, another important thing is what you use the revenue for. And like I always keep saying, I mean, we need to be focused on production. And this production, we are within a certain economic community. And our taxation structure is such that we've virtually killed our opportunity to be competitive within the ECOWAS sub-region. Other countries are charging between 15 and 18% in their VAT. We are doing about 21, going 22%. So the ETLS, which is the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme, allows us to trade amongst ourselves duty-free. So you find a lot of imports coming in from the sub-region and killing our businesses from being productive. So this re-engineering of the tax system is very, very important. And I believe strongly that once we boost local production, automatically government will generate more revenue. Because once we add value to the production as we go along, the VAT incomes will also rise. Now, when we're doing this, it is from the revenues we generate that we use for social services. So we don't need to necessarily prioritize the social services. I'm just being frank that if we don't do certain things, either in health or education or other, we will still survive somehow.
Oh, but we need health. Very important.
I mean, don't get me out. I'm not saying that we shouldn't invest in health.
So let me get you clearly, because then the perception is...
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Make it clear, yes.
We took a decision to go and build 111 hospitals. All right? About 80 to 90% of them are uncompleted. How much money have we invested there?
$400 million.
And what are we getting out of it?
Tell me.
Nothing. Now, could we have had a structure where we would have spent maybe $100 million and rehabilitated a number of the hospitals, done some expansion so that they can accommodate more patients, and then taking $300 million and gone into a great production so that the food basket and its inflation effect, everything is gone down? You know, it has a snowballing effect in building the buffers that will bring growth generally to the economy. But sometimes the choices we make for political reasons end up pushing us further down. So if we're resetting, we need to have a holistic view of all the things that we do and make sure that we stagger. You see, we don't have to, I mean, the government has a mandate for the next 4 years. The promises that were made in the manifesto don't have to be implemented within the first year. So we could have staggered it in such a way that as we are generating more revenue, then we are implementing the policies as we go along.
Okay.
So I believe that to get ourselves out of this situation, manage our debt, and so on and so forth, we must make deliberate efforts to go into productive areas, the agriculture, agribusiness, industry, make sure we are competitive within the sub-region so that we can export, bring in the foreign exchange that we need for stability, and so on and so forth. But if we don't get those dynamics right, we will keep going round and round and depending on the IMF every political cycle.
Great, and we're live on Joy 99.7 FM. We're also live on all our social media handles and platforms. You can definitely get in touch. I mean, share your thought with us, or if you have a question. Abeku, let me ask you a quick question before I go for a break. So, Frank Abuaji Denyansa, who's a real estate developer in Kumasi, is asking, how do you see property rate as revenue and also taxing artisans like masons and plumbers?
All right. So, Wisu, thank you for the question. And I like the way he asks. It says property rates. Property rates are very different from property taxes. And that is why the Ghana Revenue Authority is not a body that deals with property rates, but our local assemblies are responsible for that. From a tax policy perspective, dealing with property rate should have been relatively easier than even dealing with income taxes. And the reason is simple. The reason is simple because unlike people being able to dodge a lot more from income taxes, with property rates, they are typically on buildings. These are landed properties that you can easily trace. So when we go back to the criteria that I set out from the beginning, robustness to avoidance when it comes to property rates are relatively lower. But we are having issues with that. The first issue, obviously, is the issue of people asking themselves certain fundamental questions that even if I want to say that that is indeed my property through registration, I'm going to struggle to get titles to those properties. As long as government is unable to restructure the system such that people can easily lay claim on their properties, they will find out reasons why they would not pay those properties. Property rates, that's the first one. In the past, the GRA has actually come in to help. But what has happened, as we understand it publicly, the GRA's help to an extent have been withdrawn in a way. So the assemblies have now gone back to trying to do that. But the question is, to what extent are they able to actually implement them? So that's the bit on the property rates bit. I think that we still have quite some work to do in that particular area. The district assemblies should be up and doing. They should ensure that people can easily register their properties, and people would reduce the excuses that they would give in paying property rates. Out there, probably in the UK, you know, Winston, that a lot of things that are done in the communities are based on these rates that are being charged by the responsible district assembly, if I call it that way. But here in Ghana, we don't even see them. Everything usually comes back to the central government. So you pay, you're waiting for the central government to fix your road, to fix your gutters and all those stuff. And people will give you all manner of excuses why they cannot pay. And it ties into what my other panel members are talking about. If we don't put the expenditure basket to very good use, people will give you reasons why the revenue basket would also not work. So that's the first one. The second bit on the issue around artisans. We all use masons. We all use carpenters. You work for the multimedia family. You are subjected to income tax. Try telling your mason that you're going to withhold tax and there will be an issue. Really, under our law has excluded you, Winston, from being able, as an individual ordinarily, to withhold tax when you are making payment to another resident person.
Sure.
and say you're going to withhold tax. What have we done? Remember that when we were doing the presentation, I said, I don't even like calling it the informal economy. I understand that they exist, but I want to call it the Ghanaian economy because that is what we all grew up to come to appreciate. In 2015, 2016, the current income tax laws that we have introduced what we call a modified taxation schedule, whereby, Winston, we would simplify the taxation for our masons and all those guys to be able to also comply. What did we do? We said it's either you pay a presumptive tax rate, and if my memory serves me right, a VIP bus that move from Sectoral to Kumasi, I doubt a whole quarter, I doubt they even pay 500 cedis. I may be wrong, but somebody could check the schedule. 500 cedis a whole quarter, I don't think they pay to the government as income tax, or what you usually call the tax stamps. Now, if you get those people paying such little amount, you're going to have a situation whereby somebody would, on that score, also not comply. So I believe that government in this budget talks about the fact that they're going to use technology to ensure that the modified taxation system works. My view is, although I don't have doubts in certain parts of the budget, with this I have doubt. I have doubt because it's been 10 years since we had this in our income tax law, and we are not properly implementing them. So the first thing I've talked about is the issue of the presumptive tax paid by trotro drivers and all those stuff, and the amount I'm talking about. The second bit was that they were going to pay taxes as a percentage of revenue, and that was going to be 3%. So they're not going to pay the typical general 25% that we pay on profit. They were going to pay 3% on revenue. Has the GRA implemented this for the last 10 years? I am yet to see it. Maybe it's been implemented and I don't know, but I'm yet to see it. I'm yet to see a modified return. I'm yet to see an approach to ensure that they comply. So if the artisan who does by day or per contract is not paying income tax, I'm not saying they don't pay any form of taxes, because when they go and eat in the restaurant, they will pay VAT. So that's the way that they are discharging their obligations. When they join the commercial vehicles and their petroleum taxes, and the trotro driver increases their charge for transportation because government is getting a lot more taxes from that angle, they're also paying taxes. But the conversation I'm having is an income tax conversation. And the question is, why has the revenue struggled over the last 10 years to implement these simplified ways of one applying a flat rate on revenues to ensure that these people are also contributing to the national quotas?
Okay.
Let's remember one thing, Winston. The tax conversation and why we all must contribute is that we are all conscientizing ourselves to build the state. And if one group of people are usually taken out, the other group will also find reasons why they would not comply. So in response to his question, we have provisions in the law to ensure that those people in the small scale of our economy comply, but it's been an issue of enforcement. In this current government says, I would apply a digital means to implement the modified tax. For that one, I'm a bit skeptical because over the last 10 years, I haven't seen anything really done in that space. What would therefore happen with a digital means? So if the brick and mortar means did not work, are we really sure that the digital means would work? So that will be my response to him.
Stay with us. We'll return shortly after these messages. I still have here with me Eric Defo, who's Head of Economic Affairs at AGI. Professor Isaac Bwedi is Dean, Faculty of Accounting and Finance at UPSA. And Abeku Jankwansa is Tax Partner at PwC. We also have Professor Peter Korte joining us on Zoom. This is the Joy Business Economic Dialogue. And we've asked a very simple question: fixing the fundamentals. Is the 2025 budget Ghana's best shot at fiscal redemption? We're live on Joy 99.7 FM, also live on all our social media platforms. Stay with us. My name is Winston Amwa. We'll be right back after these messages. All right, so welcome back. This is the Joy News Channel, and tonight our focus is on the 2025 budget. Of course, in Parliament now, they're considering the estimates for the various ministries, departments, and agencies. I'm told that the appropriation bill will be passed tomorrow, and which will give the finance minister, the mandate to spend post 31st March, as in from the 1st of April, because the expenditure in advance of appropriation ends on the 31st of March. So currently undergoing, they're scrutinizing all the estimates. And so that's why we're having this conversation also. It's important to ask, for instance, we know that, the economic policies have already been passed, but we're asking very critical questions whether these policies and programs are Ghana's best shot at fiscal redemption. In studio is Eric Defo, who's Head of Economic Affairs of the Association of Ghana Industries. Professor Isaac Bwedi is the Dean of Accounting and Finance Faculty at the University of Professional Studies, Accra. Abeku Jankwansa is tax partner, PwC. And Professor Peter Korte has joined us via Zoom. I'll just get to him shortly because he needs to wrap up with us and continue other important assignments. Professor Korte, what would you say finally? Yes, Prof, if you can hear me before you leave, what would you say finally?
Well, my final point is, yes, this budget statement basically sets the tone, but we ought to be careful going forward. I mentioned, for instance, some of the expenditures. I think they are more populist than will solve our problems. So, for instance, you see an allocation of 499 million thereabout cedis to support first-year tertiary students pay their fees. But you and I know that there are a lot of basic schools that are students that are learning under trees, some basically writing on floors, no textbooks. So let's not compound the free SHS problem. Let's minimize the freebies. At least, yes, we need to support certain people, but let's not give a blanket support. Supporting both rich and poor students, first-year students in the university. I don't know whether that's the most efficient way of spending. So let's look at efficient spending, not just spending, but our expenditure has to be efficient. And finally, the need to engage in tax education and civic education. We need a mindset change. Other than that, you will bring in all the reforms, but if people do not change their way of life, our mindsets do not change, not much will change. And finally, everything we do in this budget is to aim at changing the structure of our economy. The agrarian nature of our economy, we don't add much value to exports. And that is all the problem that is leading to low revenue mobilization.
You don't see this budget addressing that? You don't see the budget addressing the, changing the structure of our economy? You don't see that in the budget?
I think one of the panelists spoke about production. You don't see much of attempts to stimulate production. Therefore, there are some that aims at promoting agriculture, irrigation. But my point is, let's do more of those. Let's do more of the things that will stimulate production. That's the way to go. Otherwise, if we continue to support in areas that are more populist than enhancing the production base of economy, we'll still be at where we are.
And so, finally, Professor Korte, this budget, 2025 budget, resetting the economy for the Ghana we want, does this set us on the path for fiscal redemption?
Well, it certainly does, but then the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating. So its ability to deliver depends on implementation. If we implement a lot of the things we have said in there, if we implement about 70 to 80% of what is in this budget statement, I believe it will set the tone. But, as I said, I'm cautiously optimistic because we have heard it several times before. Most of these things are said, but they are hardly implemented. But if this time round we implement them, then we set the tone for a redemption.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Peter Korte, who is Director of Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. Let's get into the studio again. Eric, therefore, you have a chance to tell us, from industry point of view.
Thank you very much, Winston. What I'll say is that the budget gives hope. And if we take certain deliberate actions, then we'll be on the right track to recover from the financial challenges that we find ourselves in. As I keep talking about production, I'll give a typical example of something we can do. We import a lot of poultry, I think about $300 million worth of poultry annually. And if you do backward integration of poultry into the agricultural sector, you find out that we need to grow a certain amount of maize, a certain amount of soybean, fish farming, etc., just to feed the poultry. Now, we have international oil companies on our oil blocks, and the local content component of their procurement, I think about 90% of the food is being imported, right? Why can't we produce food for them and then get benefits from local content policy? So the deliberate actions would have to be like, we've set out about 13.5 billion for the big push, which is going to go into infrastructure in this year's budget. Can we look at agribusiness, the kind of industries that will consume raw materials from the agricultural sector, create employment along that value chain, and then make sure that we start the transformation, the change of how our economy runs should begin from now. If we're able to do that, then I'm sure that before the next 2-3 years, we'll see a clear trajectory of recovery from the situation we find ourselves in. I've mentioned some of the challenges for industry. For example, interest rates. We're hoping that with the decline or the southern movement of T-bill rates, tomorrow is Friday, I think the MPC will come out to tell us whether they are dropping the GRR. Mm-hmm. And then that will also feed into reducing the cost of credit. We have seen some stability in the exchange rate, but how long can we sustain it? Because, I mean, we're doing interventions week in, week out to be able to keep it at a certain level. Is it sustainable? Power and the cost of energy. It's too high. I mean, the kind of rates we are paying even in industry for power cannot sustain competition along the sub-region. You'll be surprised to find out that when you go to the Sahel regions, they are getting power even cheaper than us. Mm. And we have the whole Volta River here. We can do so many things with it, but still, these things are feeding into high production cost. So deliberate actions must be taken. We can't just do general policies and hope that people will take advantage of the general policies. Government must, I mean, no developed country has gotten where it got to without deliberate government action. So we should do same. We can identify particular industries and say, look, we're throwing in a certain percentage of our oil revenue. I mean, there are priority areas under the, what do you call it, PRMA, that government can select. Industry is one, agric is there, road infrastructure is there. If they decide that we're going to do agribusiness and we're throwing about 250 million out of our 1 billion that we earn into that sector, a lot of transformation will occur. Jobs will be created. Some industries will go up now to do 24 hours. And I mean, the eventual benefits of settling our debts and then cleaning up our books will be achieved. I worry a little bit about the deficit because I don't see the deficit of about 57 billion having gone into anything productive.
Why?
What are we doing with it? If you can tell me. As Professor Peter Kote said, I mean, we are spending 449 million or so.
499 million.
499. Offering free tuition for first-year students.
The free academic admission fees, yes.
Good.
You don't think that's necessary?
Where's the productive aspect of it?
This is support.
It's consumption. You're just spending.
Those savings we put into the economy.
You see, the return is qualitative. It doesn't come back now. You're going to get benefits, but now we need to generate revenue through our economic activities. If we don't broaden the base where more people are contributing, then the burden sits on the few that it has been doing all the time. And we are saying that for those few people, even to be able to continue to survive and give you what they are giving you, support them one way or the other. There was a time in the 70s when we had, tiered exchange rates, for example. If you're going into agric, they give you a low rate. If you're going into trading, the rate is higher. Just that was a support measure. Unfortunately, we abused it And we abuse it because people will go and register agricultural firms, go and take the credit and go and import. But we can cure that. It doesn't mean that it's a bad policy. We can cure it and say, for example, we're giving concessionary rates for industry, right? But it's only going into capital expenditure. Then you don't have the opportunity to divert it into anything else. If I want to build a plant now to process, anything, tomatoes, right? I have to go and borrow at 34% to import the plant. Over what period will I amortize the capital cost? It's bad for business. So unless we take certain actions and say, look, we're importing, another 400 million of tomatoes from Burkina Faso. Okay, so we want to do something else here. What are the particular actions we need to take? What are the incentives? What do we invest? If we want to do agric now, we have fallow land there. We need to prepare the lands, irrigate them, grow the crops. Then, if we have excess beyond our consumption, we are feeding it into industry. But if we don't do such deliberate actions, we will still be talking.
You don't see that in the budget?
I don't see it. The fine details of the budget I haven't seen, to be honest. So I don't know how much is going into agro processing, how much is going to agricultural production, how much is going to irrigation, how much is going to warehousing. I haven't seen that yet. But maybe it might be in there. So when the fine details come out, for example, the effect of taxation on businesses or industry, there was a promise when the finance minister read the budget that will be dealt with when IMF is in town. We have all the tax experts. So I would have expected that would have been taken care of before even the budget was announced. But when it comes out and it is positive, we'll praise government. There's no point putting our own government down. But we are telling you the reality that we experience on the ground. The business environment is not favorable for production. It may end up that because we are having shortfalls in production, it opens another avenue for traders to import and fill the gap. Okay? We had a meeting with the Petroleum Commission about this local content policy and what we can supply to the oil rigs. And the concern they raise is that we don't have the stuff here. We don't have it. Even if they tell you that supply tomatoes in this quantity, do we have now to go to Burkina Faso to go and import the tomatoes to supply to the rigs? So these are some of the distortions we have in our economic policy. And we need to focus and make sure that we shouldn't be eager to do everything we've promised immediately. No. Let's grow step by step. Let's crawl, then walk before we run. But if we're looking at the vision as we want to run, so we get up and then when you haven't even learned how to take your first step, you want to start running, what will happen? You will fall. So we need to just take our time. Promises have been made in the manifesto. They are all good. They are all development-oriented. But in the implementation, we must prioritize what will generate revenue for our systems first. Try to reduce the imports. And you can only do that using substitution or the sliding scale method. As you increase the imports, you increase the production, you're reducing the imports. If we don't do that, I think we will still continue to struggle.
Great.
So my take is that, well, fine. The finance minister has done quite well, being innovative. I've seen him do some financial engineering within the existing system and created some breathing space and then put some money back. I never liked the e-levy. So I'm very happy that I'm keeping my Momo charges back in my pocket.
Thank you, Eric.
I'm not alone.
But we've been joined by the Executive Secretary of the Association of Savings and Loans Companies of Ghana, Twinibu Akodia-Boakye. He wants to share a view with us shortly. Twinibu Akodia, thank you very much for joining us. He's joining us via phone. So tell us, I'm sure you've gone through the budget, you've looked at it, you've looked at how it impacts your sector. And I ask a simple question: is this the budget that gives you hope within your sector, the savings and loan sector, the financial sector?
Good evening to your listeners. I'm up
We can hardly hear you. Maybe if you'd have to reposition yourself so we can hear you clearly.
Can I be heard now?
Well, I think it's better now. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. From where we said we've seen some positives within the budget, and one of the good things is the engagement of the Minister of Finance with industry, and we want to encourage him to continue with the engagement. Another thing has to do with the plans of supporting indigenous businesses. And we think that with the right collaboration with industry, we should be able to support the growth of the economy. Again, the support to the financial sector, i.e., the expanding the various programs with the banking sector, we think that it's a good thing in the right direction. I'm very happy that Parliament has passed the repeal of the law on e-levy, because we know it's going to also improve remittances, it's going to improve electronic transactions, we're going to receive a lot of investment into the space. We know this is going to also help us expand our reach to the hinterland. Another key thing that we have seen in the budget, which we need to encourage for it to happen, has to do with if government will want to implement any program, we should be willing to use the indigenous, the local. And I'm happy with the speaker who just spoke that let's take step by step. We should not rush, but rather continue to engage and implement the policy. And fortunately, with our association and our members, as the Savings and Loan Fraternity, we have resolved to support government in achieving its objectives. And so together with the banking sector, now that we have seen the Treasury bill also coming down, the Treasury bill rate, it gives us hope that the government will not be crowding out business. And it will give us the opportunity to also continue to learn to support the small business. Because these days, whenever you speak to business, their main challenge has to do with credit. And we are ready to continue to support the government in this program. So by and large, if we take the steps that we have taken and consistently do well, reduce the risk in the system, ensure compliance, and harmonize the various programs, we are very confident that it will be a budget that will achieve its intended purpose. And of course, we are all interested in seeing inflation down, and we all support to making sure it comes down.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Trinibua Kodiabuache, for sharing those thoughts with us. He's the Executive Secretary of the Association of Saving and Loans Companies in Ghana. Let's get in studio again. We'll talk about the tax refund, but I know Professor Isaac Boedi is interested in under-invoicing in petroleum also. But before we get to Professor Boedi, Abeku, tax refund. So the Finance Minister talks about a reduction from 6 to 4%. He says that's a lot of savings that can make up for the shortfall in the scrapping of e-levy, betting tax and emissions levy. What do you say to that?
Looks like a very good idea, but my view has been that we don't need Parliament's intervention in this matter, and I would explain why.
Okay.
So the law that we currently have on this tax refunds or the tax refund account is the Revenue Administration Act. And that law says that for the purpose of administering refunds, in other words, Winston believes he has refunds for taxes from the GRA, we will set up a refund account. And in that refund account, we'll put in up to 6% of the taxes collected, or some would even interpret expected to be collected for the period into that account. Emphasis on up to 6%. The finance minister on behalf of the president says that I have done some studies over the last number of years, and I've seen that I really spend about 50% of that. And also, I've seen some, I think the words he used was some misapplications in the accounts. And therefore, I am going to Parliament for Parliament to reduce the up to 6% to up to 4%. My view is that because the law already provides that it is up to 6%, in my view, we could have just done something administratively to say that having studied all these things, going forward, until I have reason to vary it, I am not going to give you more than 3%. What is the advantage of this to the general situation or the general conversation that we are having? Winston, if you go administrative in this part, using the existing law, if there's a reason, because of, say, the big push, the 24-hour economy, people are exporting so much, and as a result, you're having a bit more refund coming in than usual, you don't need to go back to Parliament to say, oh, I came to say, let us drop it to up to 4. Can you now take it to up to 5 for me? So you give yourself that flexibility, study the system a bit more before we do this. Yes, on the flip side, if there are indeed some misapplication or abuse of the funds, I can also understand why the minister is saying, I don't want to give you any gap at all for you to play around with that. Now, how does this refund system work, Winston? What actually happens is that the money is put in that account. At the end of the year, if GRA does not utilize the amount, it goes back into the consolidated fund. All right? So in any case, Winston, the issue is any amount not spent in the refund account goes back to the consolidated
What if it's
at the end
spent?
of the year. If it's spent, it is spent. But now the challenge that we're going to have is that...
But how do you check its expenditure? And that's where the question is, because he talks about a misapplication.
Good. So my view is that somebody that would misapply the funds at 6%, dropping it to 4%, yes, may reduce the scope of misapplication, but that does not necessarily stop the misapplication. So my view is that, and I believe the minister probably will be doing it, just that they didn't report it, if there are people who have been identified to have misapplied the funds, mismanaged the funds, and this word can be used interchangeably, let us deal with that. Now, Winston, what is going to happen now is that if the GRA believes that the cap would indeed be placed at up to 4%, it could even be 2%. What is going to happen is that when you submit your refund application, GRA doesn't typically give you a refund when you do that. For those who have submitted applications, you know. So you submit an application to GRA. The first thing GRA would usually tell you is that I am coming to conduct an audit. By the time the audit is done, more often than not, you would end up having a payable from the refund application that you made. So even at 6%, when GRA audits you, usually you'll find in their letters, dear Winston, having audited your affairs, you owe the state 100 cedis. However, we've also noticed that you have a credit of 50 cedis. What is the expectation? You net off and tell me to pay 50 cedis.
Yeah.
The letter doesn't say that. The letter will tell you that, having said it, come and pay your 100 cedis while we go through processes for you to get your 50 cedis back. And that was when the thing was up to 6%. Now that it's going to be up to 4%, my recommendation to the general public, my recommendation to businesses in particular, is that monitor your affairs well enough and ensure that you don't just get into refunds that you could have avoided. So what do I mean? At the start of the year or by the end of this month that we are in, you're actually expected to report to the GRA if your year end is December 31st. Report to the GRA how much you expect to make for the year, and then proceed on that basis to make quarterly payment to the GRA on that account.
Yeah.
Based on what is coming to happen now, the recommendation will be pay very much attention to those estimates. Because if you overpay, and the minister, I understand it's part of the bills that have been passed, now set it to 4%, the scope for refund reduces, and therefore I can expect the scrutiny, which is good, would obviously increase, and that would affect a lot more things. On the other side, what this means is that instead of the minister having to wait to the end of the year to get the amount paid back into the consolidated fund to be able to spend subsequently, now that he's not giving you that amount at all, he has room. So that is the space. So even though the minister talked about this and some people were a bit confused as to what is the tax increment coming from there, it may not necessarily be a tax increment as such. It is the fact that room has now been created for the minister to have an additional up to 2% to spend immediately and not to wait for the amount to come back into the fund. So hopefully the Revenue Authority going forward, when they declare that you owe 100, you have credit of 50, will begin saying that having looked at 150, what you owe is 50. And not to take taxpayers through the process of now having to go through the process of applying for a refund. So those are the points I would make on the refund issue of 6 to 4%.
Great. And Professor Budi, you want to say something about under-invoicing. I see you're very interested in the petroleum sector.
So I think at the end of the discussion, we're supposed to answer a question for you.
Yes, you haven't answered yours yet.
Whether it's the last resort, it's the last shot or not. We'll answer that.
Yes, we'll answer that.
Yeah, but before I think my other colleague made a statement, I was also talking about the fact that we need to support the GRA, an attempt of getting revenue into the state. Over the years, we've had a lot of issues in that sector, the petroleum sector. From days, I can give you a lot of years over the period. In 2012, as a state, we lost about $50 million under declaration of crude oil exports. In 2013, $120 million. Today we sit here, we are talking about how to get revenue into the states. When you have the other side of the equation, always under the drain, what happened? Then in terms, I think 2014, 80 million lost under exported gas sales prices. And you can find all the PIAC can give you records. If you can have that of IMF, other agencies can give you, confirm these figures for you. Non-payment of petroleum taxes for undervalued crude oil prices also affected. We lost about $100 million. Then if you look at that of 2016, about 200 million also lost through smuggling and refined petroleum products. That one you can also get for MPA audit report, also stated. Then we have somewhere in 2017, 200 million as well under invoicing of crude oil prices. I can give you countless, give you a lot of account of what happened in that sector. So yes, there's a need to manage our resources as a country, but what must we do? If GRA is struggling in terms of how to get these funds to the states, what can we do? Do we get another institution?
You need technology. You want to bring technology to assist the GRA?
Well, that is why I'm sure the company that I mentioned, they have modernized way of controlling the product that they lift for MPA. If they're able to sustain or support such initiatives as a country, we are good to go. Today you asked a very good question, do we go into capital market to go and borrow? We are looking for diverse sources of getting revenue. What do we do internally? What is happening to our revenue stream? So yes, we can go to capital market, borrow, but we realize that sometimes it could be counterproductive. And we have to watch it. What do we do locally? Those incomes that we have, funds that must come to the state, we are losing. What do we do? So yes, if there are modernized way of getting revenue or blocking the leakages that we have in the country, we should enforce those things. And that will help bring more money into the country.
Great. So let's begin to answer the question as we get ready to wrap it all up. We're important. Prof, you haven't answered the question. And
yes
when
or
we
no?
started, we said whether this, fixing the fundamentals. You started broadly, but let's get to the specifics.
Well, I think if you, there are obstacles to the redemption. One area is the pressure on the election period. Remember, very soon, when one election ends, we move to another one.
But I mean, we seem to be justifying the problem. shouldn't you be moving beyond this? I mean, it's like saying, oh, this is who we've become, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be running the economy devoid of the partisanship influences of elections?
I don't know when. I have no solution, my brother. You and I, we only come and sing to the choir. We go back. We don't have solution to this. But there should be a time we can say, yes, let's stop this. After one election, we go to. So when the pressure, the government has to go through that pressure, spending, return of jail. That's one key obstacle that we're going to face in getting to that stage where we need to have a redemption. The other thing is on the issue about the energy debt situation. The debt. We are solving about 1 point something that we owe to the IPPs or so. How can we get those ones? These are few hurdles, obstacles that we have. But the question, whether it's a last resort or not, for me, I can't stick my neck out, and I'll say it is yes. If the government is able to resist the populist pressure on spending, it can be a last resort. It's no. If we water down some of these initiatives.
So you say it's dependent on what the government does?
Exactly. So I'm giving you yes, I'm giving no, and I'm giving conditions under which all these things can be.
Can I then deduce from what you've said that the document as you see it is the last shot? However, its implementation would show whether it indeed will be. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And I've said this elsewhere, that this budget lacks, to a large extent, proper planning.
It lacks proper planning?
Yeah, proper planning.
Why?
Where is the game changer?
But I thought you said if we stick to it, it will become our last shot. But now you say it lacks proper planning.
No, if we stick it, yes, I give you were asking, I wanted to ask the question that you asked. Could it be a last resort or not? And I gave you reasons. And I said, it lacks proper planning. I've said it somewhere, and I'm saying it here again. And a lot of the things Prof. Kote also indicated, it tells you that we still have issues with this budget. My reason is the fact that we were promised of a key initiative that was going to change the status quo. And that was a 24-hour economy to run.
There's a committee in place.
Come again?
There's a committee in place. The president had indicated that within the first 120 days, he was going to put in place a committee to work on the legislative and other things. That's chaired by Guzitano.
Yeah, but was that what we were told in the manifesto?
In a 120-day contract?
Because if you don't have the figures supporting that initiative in this budget, then we are going to roll it for next year. When is it going to feature in our next budget?
Okay, let me hear from you.
Because we are going through crisis now. You say we have issues. Then that game changer, that must help us change the narrative. We can't see that game changer in your budget.
Let me hear from the industry man, whether he's concerned that he doesn't, you've seen the budget. As we're wrapping up, you've seen the budget. It talks about how, the committee has been put in place to oversee the implementation of the 24-hour economy. Or like Prof, you say, there should have been more.
What I'll say is that the 24-hour economy policy, let me put it that way, it's a good thing. I think that it cuts across both the private sector and the public sector. Abiku has been talking, and even Prof has talked about support for GRA to be able to do the job that it has to do. GRA is operating practically 8 hours. Why can't GRA scale up to 24 hours and do more by way of, doing audits for people who file their accounts and so on and so on?
I'm sure, the technology Prof talks about, I'm sure GRA implements technologies that are able to ensure that
even
they hire service of people who ensure that they monitor 24 hours.
Even in the developed countries where there's technology, they are working 24 hours. So I would say that the 24-hour policy, yes, is good. Industry can run on it. okay? But we need the necessary incentives and support to be able to scale up to the 24 hours. The scaling up will come from competitiveness. If we have the right conditions in place, we are competitive within the sub-region, we will produce. Quality is not a problem for us. Our standards are very high, but these inhibitions are there and don't make it possible for us to do the kind of scale that we want. A lot of industries are producing under capacity, and the excess capacity cost itself is a challenge to our competitiveness. So the deliberateness of our policies should be such that we look at these things and make sure that we prioritize the sectors that should receive the most support. It's not everything that you should touch. I mean, we have a lot. It's not a last shot for me. I would say that we have a last opportunity with this government. And I know that the president means well because he intends to leave a legacy. We've not had this kind of a situation before. So he should plan over his 4 years, things that he will do to make sure that by the time he's exiting, he has transformed this country from a consumption economy to a production economy. This budget alone cannot resolve all the issues, but it gives promise because I've seen some good things being done. We can't resolve all of them, but we want to see that the right steps are being taken. And industry is still expectant of direct policy initiatives that will spur on the expansion and then create more jobs for the teeming youth. So it's an opportunity. It's not a last shot for me, but it gives promise that if we do the right things, the next 4 years gives us opportunity to reset this country and transform our economy.
What would you say finally, Abeku?
Thanks, Winston, for inviting me. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of my views with the general public. And maybe just following up from where Eric landed, I hold the view that it is not the last shot. There is obviously opportunities for us to get better. I shared during the presentation time that obviously there were certain aspects that businesses were not expecting. For instance, extending the period for the growth and sustainability levy. The mining guys obviously were not expecting from 1% to 3%, even though they are expecting, gold prices have been doing well. However, with the promise of reforming the VAT, I wish to repeat once again that we are quite hopeful. I think there are quite some deadlines in the budget. The Minister of Finance says he will do that this year. He says conversations will start when the IMF comes next month. He says there will be a committee set up for the purpose of this. So we hope and believe that we'll be given an update in July, which is just about 4 months away, when he comes to tell us how we've performed from January to June through the media review. So for me, it's not the last shot. It is great that you've called us here to discuss the fundamentals, because if the fundamentals are wrong, we will not get it right. And that was why Jesus Christ talked about somebody who is building, and he talked about starting from the foundation. And if he's not able to get a strong foundation, the wind will blow and the houses will come down. So it's good we're having a conversation on the fundamentals. We hope that the government will stick to this plan. His promise of inviting us for conversation on quarterly basis to discuss tax issues so that we can all participate in the state building is a welcome call. I wish to emphasize once again that this call should actually be effective, so that when you call people, they actually see that their suggestions are being put on board. So in summary, for me, not the last shot at it. There's always an opportunity. We hope that the government would implement the pronouncement in the budget, especially on the tax part, well enough. And then by November, we'll be celebrating the successes. Thank you.
But while we wait till November, quickly on the tax administration, because you talked about the importance of it. So far, from what we've talked about, do you see anything changing in administration of tax that gives you hope, at least, that many of the things we've talked about can be implemented?
Well, so far you're talking about from January to March, right? Mm-hmm. So far from January to March. One of the things that I believe we've been calling, and now I tend to see, for instance, on the GRA website, the GRA is getting to become a lot more transparent. So I was just looking at my phone this evening. In the public, we'll be hearing about somebody who had celebrated his birthday, and we are told GRA went to freeze. GRA has issued a public statement this evening saying they've not done that. They are following the laws. They've not gotten to the point of freezing his account and all those stuff. I think it's a good thing that we are seeing. The authority is working for us, Winston. We must always remember that the public institutions are there for our benefit. The coat of arms should not be used to suppress citizens, but rather to ensure that there is a good reason why we decide to stay together in a society. So I would say that from January to March, based on their quick reaction and responsiveness, I think is good. I hope and I believe that some of the calls I've made, for example, GRA is saying you owe X, you have a credit of Y, pay X, and apply for Y. I think we must begin to change that part. If they strongly believe that that is what the law says, laws are made by humans. We can go to Parliament to say that GRA was constrained with pay X and apply for Y. Now give us the mandate to just offset. Then we'll proceed.
Thank you very, very much, Abeku Jan Kwanzaa, who is a tax partner at PwC. Thank you also, Professor Isaac Boedi, who is Dean, Faculty of Accounting and Finance at UPSA. And to you, Eric Defo, who is Head of Economic Affairs of the Association of Ghana Industries. Earlier you heard from Professor Peter Korte, who is Director at the Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research. You also heard from Chinibua Kodia-Boache, who's the Executive Secretary of the Association of Savings and Loans Companies here in Ghana. On behalf of the team, thank you very much for joining us. We're live on Joy 99.7 FM. My name is Winston Amwa. Do have a lovely evening and keep watching the Joy News channel.